down to you come in here. Right here is 6 feet.
That's me, 6 feet.
It smells wonderful.
All right, go ahead and move on down to the end of the platform. Trying to space out here, and everybody can get a feel, kind of a look of the cave itself. So I want to welcome you inside the cave. First impression coming in. What were your first impressions?
Domicile.
Cool.
Cooler.
Cooler.
Cool.
A lot cooler.
Yeah. This is where we get out of the heat.
What about the smell?
Yeah, it's pretty, smell like urine
Yeah,
or
it smells
something.
like urine. It smells like urine in here. Who else has ever walked in the bears and said that? Who else has never walked in the bears and said that? So this is the archaeological dig at Hidden Cave. If you look behind yourself on the level right now, you're below the level of what contemporary or modern people know. Right there where that orange light is, that's about the level. And if you look, it goes over to the door. It was pretty level with the door because that door had just been blowing in dirt over centuries, millennia. This here, remember that 1500 year thing I said to put in your mind? This top layer is modern times to 1500 years. That's it. It's a little tiny layer about this big. Modern times in 1500 years. So most of the stuff that you find on top, and it's kind of gross, but what makes up most of your household dust?
Skin.
Human skin, pet dander, stuff that we produce. Waste, stuff that our bodies are shedding. So you can imagine, along with the dirt and everything else that's floating there, been brought in here, there's a lot of human material in here, human genetic material. Now this was not a dwelling cave. This was a cache cave. Because the opening was so small and it's so dark and so dusty, it was just used for storage. Now, you can imagine in the lean time or you're hiding out from somebody, you don't care how dark it is, you're gonna hide out. I would imagine over a few thousand years that probably happened at some point in time. Not to mention we're at the far end of this point on this mountain range. This is kind of like the last stronghold, the last ditch effort, the last, there's a very ceremonial place on the end. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of it, where you have a place you can store in a cool, dry area for a very long, extended amount of time, anything you want. Food, clothing, tools, weapons, materials to make those things, materials to gather those things, anything that you need in the coming year to go from the valley to the hills, to the desert, to the mountains to get pine nuts, back out and around, do some big game hunting, and come back down before you get a really hard freeze, and live the rest of your time out in these valleys so it starts to get warm again. Now the contemporary people here are known as Paiutes. That was kind of the amalgamated name that they were given by contemporary society. Because they, obviously language barriers. So the contemporary society called them Paiutes. Before they dwelled with that name, they just dwelled out here as people, as human beings. They grew and they lived in these spots, and they eventually would become known for the locations and their food source. So the people here were known as a Toitakutta. Toitakutta means cattail eater. Over in Schurz, you have the Gaitakutta. That's the trout eaters. Now we have Grimes Point here. You have Stillwater on this side. And you have Carson Lake on this side. On the Carson Lake side, those were the Puhutakutta. Those were the duck eaters. It was a much shallower lake / marsh. If you look at how this lake forms over here, if you've not been here for a amount of time, that lake was almost dry 2 years ago. When it rained and snowed so much in the mountains, that water fed down. There had not been water in there for 20 some odd years, to that degree. That water used to spill way over out into salt wells into that area. So this is all a series of shallow marshes and lakes that went through there. When they would travel and hunt, they would pick up people as they would go. So they would kind of pick up bands. So maybe you have people coming from Pyramid Lake area. They'd pick up bands of people as they come through. As they gathered up in Stillwater, they would get fed and they'd feed all the people they're traveling with, and they go through a pass that goes right over into Dixie Valley. They'd pick up people in Dixie Valley, and they would eventually go as far out as the Austin area, way out there. It's a long ways. They do anything from hunt, fish, gather. They go out there to fandango. I'll get into that. They go out there to fight. They did a lot of things out in just this few specific areas out near the Reese River Valley towards Austin. So they ranged a long ways. Eventually, they would make their way back to their little home area where they call, wherever their food source was. So Stillwater people would come back. The big group would come through. They'd feed all the people who were leaving, and then all the people that lived in this mountain range would all disperse into something like 16 different villages and people that broke into all these different family groups from end to end of the Stillwater Mountain. So there was a lot of people just on this west-facing side of the Stillwater Mountain Range. That doesn't account for the people on the east side of the mountain range or in Dixie Valley that were still considered family. They're just kind of, the ones that lived in the further out neighborhood. So that's the beginning of human history. We talked about way up here where they started. Well, history in the cave actually begins way down here. That's actually the bedrock. Extending all the way up through here is about 16,000 years worth of history. Now, there's a good thing that cuts this in half, and it's right here. When you come down, you'll see it. It cuts the strata right in half with this tape. You see that surveyor line? Mm-hmm. There's actually a layer of ash. It was a great thing to go where we went last weekend because we were right by Crater Lake. And I could tell people, 8,000 years ago, Crater Lake erupted because there was no lake there. It was a volcano. It erupted and just sent ash for years. That ash hung so long and so far that if you come down and look, there's a layer of ash compacted in the dirt about this thick. That's a thick layer of ash compacted under this amount of earth. You can imagine at that 8,000 year mark, there was an epoch. It got cold for a long time. Now, a lot of the people in North America were kind of used to that because they came from that time when the water was still getting warm. It was still freezing. It was still, maritime climates. They would get these monsoons any time of the year because it was so tumultuous between the Sierra Nevadas and the Rocky Mountains. If you can imagine what the Rocky Mountains do now when the air blows off the Rocky Mountains, you get tornadoes all over the East Coast, all through the Bible Belt, all through the South. It causes so much disruption. If you can imagine a flat sheet of water with islands on it, with nothing but water to feed water spouts, tornadoes, and everything else of that manner, those things happen quite often. You still see tornadoes in Fallon. Strong tornadoes. Sometimes you'll just be riding on the desert, it's getting dark, it's kind of that turbulent time, kind of moist, and you'll just see a big gathering. It looks like a giant dust devil till you look up and you see it touching the clouds, pulling cloud down. You realize that's not something you want to mess with. It's like a lightning storm. You see a lightning storm out here, you go anywhere but where you're at, because where you're at is usually out in the flats. Those were things that people, again, progressed over time. They went from this high island, these islands, way down here, and adjusting to that. This is a record of that adjustment. We talk about the contemporary time, and the people who came and used the cave in the contemporary modern time, the settlement time, and the pioneer time. They would use that picnic cave and never even knew this was here. Back in the 20s, there were a lot of settlers in the Lawton Valley by then. By then, they had homesteaders out here in the 1860s, and by then, they've been establishing ranches and farms and industry, towns, mines, all kinds of stuff were established. Eventually, the rail would come through right north of us. It would pass through the 40-mile desert where people were previously going on foot, on cart, pulling hand carts, pulling their animals, and a lot of times, many of those people didn't make it because there was nothing. If you go there now, you'll see why people didn't make it. Just a vast expanse of nothing, with mountains in the way that you don't want to go up because they're rocky and there's nothing but rattlesnakes in those mountains. They would come across this desert and completely avoid this area. Because one part of the mountain range wraps around, this valley was unexposed. You could look down here and it would just look like another set of mountain ranges. When in fact there's this big huge valley, lush green valley with waterfowl, shorebirds, fish, anything you can think of to eat on the west coast. There's an example of it here at those times because so wet, and so lush, and so warm. People could eat here indefinitely. And they would pass by, and they would bury their kids, and bury their family, and leave their animals, and their carts, and all this other stuff. There's stories from our old people going up there and wandering around, just finding stuff thrown all over the place. They have old purses and mirrors and little tools and all these little things that people just left behind because they just could not go any further with this. And they move on to Oregon or California, or heaven forbid, they only made it as far as Fernley and settled there. Just that's how people settled in Fernley. They just kind of got trapped there.
Can't go no further.
That area in Fernley is actually kind of the high area where it starts to break us from the Sierra Nevadas. The Truckee River flows right through there. There's a great big dune that kind of cuts us off. But at one point in time, up until about maybe 100 years ago, maybe a little less, we stopped getting that overrun from Truckee River. There used to be overrun of Truckee River that used to wash in the valley. Right along with the end of the Humboldt River that comes from the east, and the Carson River that comes from the west. So we didn't go dry by sheer fact that we are surrounded by mountains, and we had these rivers still feeding this valley. The last little remnants of ancient Lake Mohawk is still there. And right here, there's still examples of it here and there. This is one spot that still retains both the human habitation and some of the natural environment mixed in with whatever we've come up with in that interval. So if you guys want to come down, go ahead and come down on this side. Just be very careful not to touch the sides. Do not disrupt the tags. So take a look at all the blue tags. They'll tell you a story from the bottom up. There's interesting things in here that I can point out that are much more interesting than your life. Right up on these. As you come down, look around on the tags and on the walls. You'll see little spots of red. A few years ago, some people came in and they partied. They peed in the corners, left garbage, and for whatever reason, spray painted red of just dumb stuff. I would imagine if it were art, cool, we'd fix it. But just for dumb reasons, sprayed red paint, red spray paint here, really dumb stuff. You'll see remnants on bits of the signage,
Idiots.
and you'll see parts where they've actually had to scrape off the surface, especially right here in this upper level. You'll see where it's a little bit more pale, where they've had to scrape it off. The reason for that is if that paint touches any of the organic material that's in the dirt, it'll actually leach into the material and start to break it down even faster.
The tag came off right here.
So yes, this cave wasn't technically a habitation cave, it was a cache cave. They did find human remains in here. That's a fact. There are human remains that have been found in here, along with various
Shine on up here.
sets of animal
Oh, that's
remains
cool.
from various times, including what we would call prehistory, animals that don't exist anymore. Animals that not just went extinct, but also just couldn't survive the changing environment. They came woolly and thick and big from this really cold time. So you had wolves now who are from nose to butt, 7, 8 feet. Back then, it wasn't unreal to find a 10 or 11 foot wolf from nose to butt. That's not counting the tail, that's nose to butt. So the people experienced megafauna still remaining from the previous ice age. Those animals were still evolving, still trying to get used to it getting so warm so fast. That's when all the smaller animals and what big game animals we know now started to really proliferate the areas, because now they can move down into these valleys and have vast expanses of water and space and everything that they could possibly need. So we have from here 1,500 years to modern times. Now we're in here exchanging carbon with history. We're leaving carbon in here that's actually could be dated later on, just by us simply being in here. And on this top layer of stuff, we're leaving genetic data in this cave. Let's see.
We're part of history.
We're part of history.
How long did it take to do the whole excavation?
It was between, okay, so when you were up here, you saw these kind of pits that were dug out.
You can get behind
These were the
me.
previous ones that were done in the earlier part of the century. The main body of this dig was done in 1979 and 1980. They had people from the Natural History Museum and from UNR that came in here, and they just went to work on this thing. A few dozen people over that whole span of a year. really got this done. Here's that ash line. So you can see it right there, that big thick ash line. And if you follow it around, there's a yellow surveying tape that cuts the timeline in half. So as you get further and further down, the dirt gets harder and harder compacted from pressure. So your timeline gets kind of loose from the top to the bottom. As it gets further and further down, it gets a little bit tighter in which you can actually nail down timeline-wise. Plus, you probably still have a lot of moisture in here in the bottom left over when the cave is still forming. It didn't go completely dry. The size of this cave is much bigger than you might think. When they did the LiDAR readings of this to get a reading of just the rock without all the dirt and all these loose boulders, they said that you could fit 2 regulation-sized NBA basketball courts and a crowd to fit around them to spectate in this cave. After you strip out all this dirt and kind of make the space to do that. That's a lot larger than you think. And people have asked, and I think one of you did mention, you know, is there still stuff here or there? Oh yeah, if you look at this one spot, there's that much more, including these high areas that really have not been dug into. So anything could be here. You have in northern Nevada, out by Pyramid Lake, remains that range in the 12,000-year-old range. You have some of the oldest petroglyphs in the world, especially out by Pyramid Lake, because you have a little bit higher mountain range. There's stuff in this, just around this Lahontan Valley that's either undiscovered, unmaintained, or left recovered, or left to be reclaimed.
It's not where he took
Now,
out
the BLM,
artifacts right here.
along with
Took out
tribes,
something.
decided that when they do find things that are only exposed so high above the ground, they'll just recover it and leave it there. They have a mark and a map to determine where all of this stuff is. Sorry guys, I'm just kind of fading here. They know where all these things are, they just don't list them publicly. So if you understand also how vast, you obviously know how big and how much space NAS Fallon takes up. Not only NAS Fallon, but also Nellis, anything else in between, the ammunition depot in Hawthorne. There's a lot of area that's taken up by military in the United States. Just in Nevada, Nevada is mostly federal land. So you have these areas that are kind of unexposed, they're unencumbered with a lot of high travel, high traffic things that are going on. But we do have things like I mentioned, the plane crash. As they were kind of mobbing through the desert with these big boom trucks, they were churning stuff up, and we go through, cover that stuff up. You know, usually it's made note of, or if there's not already a note, we just kind of know, hey, this got disturbed. We tell them again. This area is so history rich that there's things in here that in 10 of our lifetimes are still going to be discovered, and people are going to be awed and just in total disarray on how much human history just in Nevada changes world history, or the thought of how people migrated or survived or lived in different places throughout time. Also in northern Nevada, you find a set of the oldest mummified remains in the world, and they're found within this area. That's kind of a deep thing to think of when you think 11,500 years ago is the approximate carbon date of these remains. What was the rest of the world doing 11,000 years ago? So we'll take 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, and try not to shine you guys in the eyes, we're just below that blue, upper blue tag right there. 2,000 years ago. The way it was found was several boys from some of the local ranches in the 20s had heard a story of a stagecoach that was robbed, and the whatever their coins or payroll was never recovered. So the boys came out here naturally poking around, having fun. They start getting bored and throwing rocks at each other. One boy throws a rock at another, and it goes behind a boulder, but they never hear it hit the ground. They come around and they find this hole. The smallest boy crawls in and crawls out a minute later saying it's too dark. Those times you had to light your way with candles and kerosene lamps. So they raced home to whatever ranches they were from, came back, and it was too dark, they couldn't find it. A few years later, a rancher heard the story and had an assumption, comes out, and sure enough, he finds what he's looking for. This cave is full of bats. Where there's bats, there's bat guano. And bat guano is full of ammonium nitrate. In a agriculture and mining state, or area, or district, or county, or anywhere at that time, ammonium nitrate was extremely valuable because you could make fertilizer and you can make explosives. So this was a cash cave, CASH, for that rancher. He was able to get his ranch going. He was able to make a little bit of money. But he dug down to a certain point, stopped, grabbed his stuff, rode into town to the post office, which was the nearest federal office, and said, look, can you contact the state or whoever you need to, contact the museum? I was out here digging, and I got to a point where I couldn't keep digging because there was too much Indian junk. I mean, literally, there's too much Indian junk. He couldn't dig anymore. So that level is about right here. When we came in, you can imagine it was just full of bat guano on here for a few thousand years of bats living in a marsh with nothing but mosquitoes, like a solid mass of mosquitoes several times a day. They could go out, eat, come back. They were wanting for nothing. So you can imagine this cave was just full of bat guano. They did the first dig in 1940 and kind of closed it up. In 1950, they made sure that they put a grate over the door so that the bats could get in and out. In 1940, in 1950, they finally closed it up. 1979 and 1980, they did the great big dig here, and then from here on out, this is what it's been. It's been relatively unchanged, minus some vandalism for that long. And the reason why they keep it open is so that people can come and see and touch and smell history. So when people walk in, oh gosh, what's that smell? I've literally heard kids say, oh, that's history. And I think, A, who's raising you? And B, where have you been? This smells like history. But they're right. I mean, when you walk into a lot of these old places, they're not often just habitable by humans. They're habitable by other things, and oftentimes they're either animals are there before, during, and after the humans are. So in leaving this kind of closed, yeah, we've shut off the bats. They don't have this place to go. But again, you look out there and what's there now, the amount of mosquitoes now versus the amount of mosquitoes 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 1,500, 1,000 years ago is going to be vastly different. Our idea of gathering resources and food is vastly different. The people who were here were called the cattail eaters because that's what they would do. In the warm months, as soon as those cattail shoots start popping up, they start pulling them out and eating the shoots, leaving the root ball to grow later on into more and more and more tules and cattails. That was their primary food source during the warm months. That way they could work on all the craft and all the tools and all the things that they needed to go and hunt rabbits, to hunt more ducks, to hunt geese, to gather eggs, to go way up in the mountains to gather minerals, make their own clothes and shoes and everything else out of all the reeds and willows and everything else. It was a constant thing, and I like to tell people that life back then was just a constant hunt for calories. That was their main goal. What was their next meal? We got to eat all this dry seeds and dried meat and stuff through the winter, maybe, go pull out a root ball when it gets really cold and heat it up so we get some good starchy food to get us going for the day. But it's a limited resource because we don't want to kill that for later. So they kept these cycles going for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and this place helps us see not only where modern intervention happens, but also through time where the cave was created up until we get to this point where chances are until the end of time this thing's going to be sealed up. When humans finally end, that steel door, if it's locked, it's going to be locked forever. And it's going to be a little bit more durable. Chances are the hill will come down around that steel door before anything ever happens to that steel door. So notable things. When you're walking down, you can actually see the surface. There's a few loose rocks and stuff that are actually on the top. There were some actual grinding stones and stuff that they found in this cave, and some of it remains. A lot of this is in the Churchill County Museum, what they brought out of here. Some of it's in the Smithsonian, some of it's in UC Davis. It's kind of scattered from what you can imagine, all the different things that they pulled from these little areas. This is roughly the size of square that they're working with. Sorry, that's really bright. This is roughly the size of square that they're working with. Each square that they dug was only a few inches deep. So they're digging these squares one by one by one by one by, oh my gosh. This must have been the most tedious thing, being in here, smelling of bat guano and people funk for however long it took them to dig all of this out and catalog it. That's what all these tags are. They all have a catalog mark of timelines, materials, carbon dating, all kinds of different things that are all studied just from this cave. Up here,
Hey, Joe,
Yeah.
was there a specific thing they were looking for when they came in here and excavated this?
just that, because they had the surface stuff, they were finding baskets, they were finding tools, they were finding stone points, they were finding animal remains, you know, stuff that was processed, not just, you know, bone piles.
Yeah.
They're finding bones that were used for things, teeth, things that were used as tools or adornment or whatever they were using them as. And they knew according to this area that there had to be something more. Once they found this set of remains in this archaeological district that had that over 10,000 year mark, things kind of shut down in the state of Nevada. They went dark and they started to have all these theories pop out about how humans developed in northern Nevada, from total replacement 500 years ago to the chances of, because they could have been seafaring people. Seafaring people are very class oriented, so chances are there could have actually been, this is a theory, a slave class and the ruling class, and perhaps some of the slave class actually got away and branched out from there. So there's all these different theories. But our story is we were created up on the Stillwater Mountains by the mother and the father. And the mother and father, at that time when they created this, when they were here roaming, they dropped all the resources in the places that they needed to be. Because they would eventually have 2 sons and 2 daughters. And they sent these 2 sons and 2 daughters away because they were just constantly fighting. In their constant battles, they sent them away in different directions. And they went away for a real long time. In that time, mother and father wandered and wandered and wandered, and they dropped things like pine nuts to grow trees. And they said the mother would cry, she'd sit down and cry, and there was springs that would pop out of these areas. So there was resources all over these mountains. Even in these low mountains, there were springs and places to get food and minerals that don't exist now, just because they've dried up and blown away or just been covered up over time. When the one tribe, or the one brother and sister set came back, they brought people with them. They brought their families. They brought everybody that they gathered up, and they came and they settled, and eventually they would branch out and create all these different bands of Paiutes that are all around northern Nevada, Oregon, Idaho, northern California. That's our creation story. That's how we settled here. Now, I tell that story and kind of leave people hanging, because every now and then you'll get somebody say, well, wait a minute, weren't there 2 sets of sons and daughters? Well, the other set of sons and daughters wandered and wandered and wandered and wandered, and finally came back. And in I think it was 1830s, 1840s, when John C. Fremont came through Nevada, they didn't realize that there were people here. There was always an assumption that there could be people here, but they didn't realize. He had been following waterways, whether it was creeks and streams, looking for animals to trap. Muskrats, minks, beavers, all the furs of those times that people were paying really, really good money for, they were out here looking for them. So when John C. Fremont finally made it over, probably north of here, way north of here, and he saw people, he had shown up and had such long hair and a long beard that when he saw them, his eyes were wide. He didn't realize, they didn't realize there was people out here thriving, not just surviving, but thriving, living, that could point out to them any resource that they were possibly needing or wanting. That he was just so shocked, and his eyes were so wide that they called him Muhutsu. Muhutsu means owl man, because he looked like this big owl, and he was so shocked his eyes were wide, and when you're dirty and you got fur all over your face and your eyes open any width wider than what they're normally wide, they look like they're really, really, really white. So that was their first real interaction with anybody outside of indigenous people. That's how isolated they were. That's only 100 and not even 200 years ago to this point. It wasn't until the 1860s when they start finding silver and then they start bringing in prospectors, homesteaders. That's when it really started to pick up. 1864, Nevada becomes a state. It rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls. Now, one of our generations, I was lucky to know this generation. One of the grandmothers was born in 1889, and her husband was born in 1879. So they lived at this time. That's about when people really start to have contact with the settlers and start working with the ranches and start doing jobs for them. They're still kind of living in these sloughs and outlying areas, still living this traditional way. That's when you start seeing them wearing cloth. start integrating stuff onto their houses, like on their Thule hut houses, cattail hut houses. Things like doors and canvas and stuff to kind of keep them warmer and warmer. That generation grew up being born, living and dying out here in the marsh, in the hills, in the mountains, traveling in these places throughout the year. So when they would get old, they would kind of do the same thing. They'd have family take them from place to place to place. And this particular grandmother, it would take her a week to go from Fallon, Nevada, all the way to Woodford, California, which is only 70 miles away, because they traveled kind of the old way. They would go and they would stay overnight with people, and they'd visit and they would talk. Sometimes they would work on stuff, or they'd show work they were doing. By this time, they were very, very old. And they would show off old baskets and all these old things, and they'd be teaching stuff teaching people things along the way. At the time I was living with my great-grandmother in Carson City, this grandmother went up there also. And so we have pictures of these two together, these two women who grew up out here in the marshes for 50, 60 years, 70 years before they finally moved out and kind of settled with their family wherever they were settling at. People who saw that turn of time, it's a really hard thing to explain to anybody old or younger than my generation now or our generation now, that connection, because they don't really see or understand, you know, the mannerisms or the way that those people spoke. Once you're around those people long enough, just like us, when we're around these older generations, we understand, we kind of pick up. It's not necessarily something that they teach us, it's all this indirect influence that they have, along with, you know, who else here had the hard-nosed family member who just always kept you on track, kept you going, or the one that was softer and tender. And we had all those different kind of nuances wrapped up within a community that would carry you so far, and that could bring us here today and communicate these exact same things. And in the hope that, you know, you'll actually go out and say, okay, I smelled history. It smells like backwater. But under that smell, you have layers and layers and layers of things that, you know, we can comprehend now, but the complete understanding doesn't happen until we go out there and immerse ourselves in it. Or, you know, be dirty, be hot, be uncomfortable, be hungry, be tired, be thirsty. Be all those things rather than air conditioned, which, honestly, this is the best air conditioning I could. This nice, cool, natural air is so nice, minus iguanas. So as a quick note, if you guys want to stand right there for just a minute, when you do come up.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick, how did this area fare out during the gold rush?
Oh, just a second. Watch your head coming up.
More of a silver rush, I think, here too.
I want to share this with you guys. So the tooling, I can actually demonstrate some tooling outside, but right here, you guys see that right there? There's a big shaft.
Yeah.
If you want to come up, actually walk up through here. I'll step out a little bit, and you can see it as you walk up. It's right there. See it poking out?
Yep.
So go ahead and kind of stack out to on the platform as you come up. There's actually 2 or 3 of these. There's one here,
Oh, damn,
one
that's
there.
cool.
There's one down on the corner down there just poking out. It's kind of neat. It's exposed right above your head as you're standing over there. These are actually atlatl shafts. These are the darts that they used to throw with the atlatl. If you look at the level, it's over 2,000 years ago.
That's crazy.
That's an old tool developed for hunting larger game. And we're talking larger game. When I was talking about that megafauna we still had left over from the Ice Age. Yep, you see that right there. There's one out there. There's a bunch of little ones, arrows and a few other things. There's also, if you look, there's little plant material that's poking out there. It looks like kind of tules and cattails poking out. Those are the bags and mats that they would weave to store their stuff in. So when they were putting dried meats, seeds, tools, clothes, whatever they're putting in here, they'd often lay down a big mat of tule or cattail that was woven tight enough to just keep the dirt out of it, put it in there and cover it up again. So when you see stuff still in there, those people didn't make it back to take that stuff out. You know, they went out, they lived their lives, they came, they stored stuff here, but if it's still stored here, chances are they didn't make it back. A lot of these seeds and stuff, when they were digging through here, they could tell exactly what it was physically. They could see exactly what these things were. and almost date how old they were according to how they looked, because they were in such great condition in this odd little hole. If you look at the roof up here, you get, you know, good reds and stuff, but it just gets darker and darker and darker as you go up to right there. There's actually a spot of tar in the rock right there. That tar is left over from that rancher burning tires. Because back then they didn't have vulcanized rubber on their tires. It was regular tire rubber, and when it would smoke and burn and stuff, there was a lot of soot. And so that's what that's left over from, is the deposit from all that tar from the tires that he was burning.
In here?
In here. That's how he would get the bats out. He'd come in here, he'd make his little pit, he'd light it up, and all the bats would leave. He'd come, scrape stuff out, and then take off again. You'd imagine there's a very limited time you could be in here from A, no ventilation, and B, no light. You're burning tires in here to get the bats out, so you gotta get the smoke out enough just to get in here, scrape out some really ugly smelling gold.
Before the bats come
and
back.
go back out again. Now, you didn't mention the gold rush. The gold rush, we were bypassed by the Russians, we were bypassed by the Spaniards, and we were bypassed by the gold rush. We could not beat the Comstock rush that happened in Virginia City. In the 1860s, they were looking for gold, 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 gold. We were at war. So they wanted all the gold they could. They start finding black rocks as they're looking for gold. They realize it's silver ore. Nevada suddenly boomed. I mean, there had already been mines all over, even in these mountains here, there had been a lot of mines. When Virginia City boomed, it brought people. From the east or from the west, it brought people from San Francisco. It brought a lot of Chinese up. From the south, it brought a lot of Mexicans up. From the north, yeah, it brought down Mexicans. It brought down, or excuse me, it brought down Canadians, French. It brought down Russians. It brought down the entire United States. If you can imagine, that much of the United States had a lot of people in it. So many of them came this way because A, the gold rush in California, and then suddenly B, you have the silver rush in Nevada. And you are in a wartime. So guess who's paying a premium for your ore? The United States government and or the Confederate States of America, because they were all at this time trying to build their war machine. Nevada becomes a state. In that time that Nevada becomes a state, they have built a few forts, and you start seeing skirmishes between people. The notable one is the Paiute Wars of Pyramid Lake, which was started because some ranchers had taken some girls. The question of they taken them maliciously, they'd seen them wandering, whatever the issue was, they'd taken these girls and they weren't giving them back. Naturally, the people from Pyramid Lake weren't too happy about that, and they went to go and try and reclaim these girls. A skirmish happened. They started chasing the Indians back to Pyramid Lake. If anything in history teaches you something, you don't chase the indigenous people back to where they came from, because guess what? It's a trap. And as they came through the Truckee River from the north, let's see, up by Wadsworth, it channels down in between the mountains, and in there they had what they called a battle, but they spanked the cavalry and the militia and sent them running, is what happened, because they were so overwhelmed by the terrain. They were boxed in the bottom of a river with nothing but hills on the side, and places to hide, and nothing but choke points. And so they came to a nice wide area, lots of sagebrush, and thought it was safe. Well, that nice wide area got closed in from behind, and that's where the really big battle happened. Skirmishes like that weren't very common, but they were notable, because the northern Paiute was technically never conquered. Though they would eventually be put on reservations, through terms of war, they were never conquered. They were never completely rounded up and assimilated the way a lot of other peoples were. They never completely lost their indigenous range, and they were able to retain the identity of their food source, which people find weird, like, oh, we're the McDonald's clan, the Burger King clan, and way over there is, Hardee's, because that's where it changes in the Midwest, right? It's the same idea of, we had those same areas, we had those similar food sources, and that's how we got along. That's how we traded, and that's how eventually we made it here. All peoples in the world did this exact same thing. If there's anything I try to teach, is that, yeah, those two brothers and sisters, when they eventually came back, was it the best thing for the area? Probably not. I mean, you see the area and what it looks like now. The natural state of the area was it was in a drying trend. The people had been, over the time of adjusting from being these cold islanders down to the dry scrub brushes of northern Nevada, had adjusted to that. And chances are they would have adjusted to that over that next 1,000 years. And it would not have been a big deal. It just would have been another layer in a cave like this. But since that didn't happen, we look at the tribe that came back and say, if we can't get back those old times in these old places, what's coming next?